Welcome back to the Think Bunker. This is the third installment of the Bunker Brief series, and this is the fifth rewrite. As such, we've had a bit of a hiatus of about 3 months. With that being said, Kento, what are we talking about today?
Okay, we got an interesting subject today. We've got the Battle of White Mountain between the Holy Roman Empire and the Bohemian Confederation in 1620.
It's not
Uh,
just Battle of White Mountain. We have a little bit before as well, and leading up to, well, we'll get into that.
yeah,
Funnily enough,
so
the Battle of White Mountain is more of the actual. The Battle of White Mountain, there's more about the prelude to the battle than the actual battle itself.
mhm. the I'm going to start this off with a little bit of a disclaimer and a little bit of a preface. The setup for this battle is sheer insanity, and you would think it's made up, but it is not, unfortunately. Uh, the battle is definitely going to be talked about. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the problems of Europe, but just know that we're going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes on it. So if you want to skip ahead, do. Uh, the battle is also steeped in a little bit of information that it doesn't exist. So some of this will be is kind of my own interpretation of what, or we'll discuss that when we get to it. But the battle has information that is really, really important that we don't have and does not make sense of what we do have. Now, let's get started and to the meat of it. The prelude to this battle is absolute insanity. What you're looking at is a brief synopsis of what went wrong. Take a minute. That is honestly an understatement of what happened.
This is a, this is around the time where a certain German boy with a certain Luther names stapled or nailed 95 theses to the church door and saying, "Well, this is what we could do better about the church," and they didn't like him. And then he started printing Bibles in German instead of Latin, so that the common man that could read could read.
Yeah, and that incident, which is about 100 years before this, started another series of incidents which resulted in the Peace of Augsburg, which is going to set up for this insanity. The the Lutherans, while there was peace between the Catholics and the Lutherans through the Peace of Augsburg, uh, had an underlying religious unrest in the area, which wound up resulting in the increase in tensions, a split in the government, and the ultimate Bohemian revolt, which would wind up starting the 30 Years' War. Mainly because of one guy. On the left, you see a dunce hat on somebody. That is Rudolph II. He is an idiot. He is one of the only emperors for the Holy Roman Empire who gets kicked out of office. And he is so bad at his job that just before leaving, he writes a letter called the Letter of Majesty, which set the Christian world on fire because it basically said if you can become a Protestant held area or a Catholic held area, and it is totally fine. The power struggle of the century began, which was very
Yeah,
bad.
yeah. The general incompetence I can sum up of this man is basically the Habsburg family tree looked more competent than his leadership.
Well, he was a Habsburg. which is even worse. It makes them look worse.
Oh, I forgot about that. That actually explains a lot.
So
Oh
it
my word.
the religious unrest and the complete and utter confusion of everyone involved, including his predecessor, Matthias. He doesn't really matter in the story, uh, because he didn't wind up fixing any of the problems, and he just sort of sit there and let it happen. Wound up with the Protestants in this case, who are Lutherans. The Protestants are divided into two groups. You have your Lutherans and Calvinists. Calvinists make up a minority in the religious sects of Europe, and for the most part, no one involved in this is a Calvinist. They are all Lutherans. And due to a discourse at one of the governor's meetings in Prague, several Catholics are defenestrated out of the third story on the building on the top right.
Man, none of them, I don't believe any of them actually died. They just sustained severe injuries.
No,
But
they
it is
didn't
like,
sustain any injuries. They were completely fine.
yes, they walked away even. No, one of my favorite events in history, the Third Defenestration.
No, this is the second one.
Well, the third would be the third man. There were three people defenestrated.
No, no, no. The three were thrown out this time. There was a time before this and a time after this.
Mm.
There's a lot of people thrown into this building for some weird reason.
Studying European history, it's a very complicated and documented European history is already ridiculous enough. Then you get to stuff like this, where it's he said, she said. Our documents, or actually, at this point, rumors. Our rumors against these rumors, because the documentation seldomly exists from this era, and secondly, there's not exactly anyone around to tell us as a primary source of what happened.
We should resurrect them.
Anyone down for some necromancy?
Yes. At this event, going back to what Painful had brought up, there are two accounts of the second defenestration of Prague, in which the Protestants say that when the people were of the building, the out of the windows, the red arrow was pointing to on the third floor, that they fell into a pile of horse manure and were saved by the manure breaking their fall.
Mm.
The Catholics say that the Virgin Mary appeared, stopped them from falling, said that they were blessed by God, and that they had the will of God on their side, and that they were correct in everything they did afterwards.
So, which one sounds more psychotic than the other?
I vote we pick the funny one. To this day, no, there's massive arguments over who is correct in this one, and at this point, it doesn't really matter. The whether the horse manure or the Virgin Mary showed up, or it was angels. These men were thrown into the building, and that they were okay somehow. We don't know. There was a big pillow down there. That's my head canon.
There are many different defenestrations in the past and many to come. And we don't have time to discuss all of them.
There's just a cartoon, just Looney Tune style whoopee cushion at the bottom.
Well, given that this is the second one, I would assume that because the first one that they started putting pillows down there.
For some reason.
But they were thrown out of the building because of the discourse between all of the governors inside of the building devolved into a screaming match, and then a he said, she said, and he said, "You're not allowed in the building anymore," and refused to show him the door and instead showed him the window.
Yes, and instead of showing them the door, as Kento pointed out, they said instead of removing them peacefully, they removed them violently, or rather, they removed them the expressway down.
Yep. Also, this place is really cool. It still exists. You can go visit it. You can pretend to throw your family members out of the windows.
Pretend,
Mm-hmm.
pretend
But
pretend the German government still wants me for murder.
the other thing is, while this was very, very bad, and at this point the revolt was an assured certainty, it became even worse when Frederick V, the guy with the crown on his head, I found that crown image and I just decided to put it on him because he deserves it. He became the king of Bohemia. And as a Calvinist, he's the only person in this entire situation who's a Calvinist. Or just, he's Protestant in general. And he wants the area of Bohemia to be a Protestant um, zone. However, the guy on the right of the verses sign heavily disagrees with this and chooses to find the violent solution to this problem. That is Ferdinand II. Now, while Rudolph is an idiot and a super open to ideas person, Ferdinand II is not one of these people. He is a Catholic through and through. This guy is violently Catholic. Oh yeah, this guy was not having it and said that this is a full-blown revolt and I will start repressing everyone. The Holy Roman Empire is a Catholic state, and anyone else who says otherwise is a loser. So the only alternative here is war. And Frederick V not only declares war on the Bohemian and Protestant forces, also the forces from Hungary to an extent are involved in this, but they're not involved in this battle except for a few mercenaries. He is going to make an example out of them and not only gets the Holy Roman Empire's army ready for war, he reestablishes the Catholic League and tells them to find some Protestants. So, with the Protestant held Prague, which is one of their largest cities, it is where Frederick V is, and it is where the majority of their resources are. Prague is a very rich city at this time, located in the modern Czech Republic. The Catholic forces want to make an example out of it. So the generals are sent out to effectively fight each other after chasing each other around Bohemia for a while and the Electoral Palatinate for a while. The generals in this battle there are two armies represented on each side for the Holy Roman Empire. It is the Holy Roman Empire's army, and it is the Catholic League, which is the white and checkered background with the Saint. I believe that is Saint Mary in the center of it, and the Bohemian Confederation, which is represented by that seal. And the Electoral Palatinate has a general and a force here under the name of Anhalt. The flag is one that I found to represent Anhalt personally, and just a way to differentiate these on the battlefield. Unusual for a ton of battles. Pretty much everyone here is a seasoned veteran. They all have a very large understanding of warfare. They all have had experience in somewhere or another. And a couple of these have seen some earlier engagements during the Bohemian Revolt. The main general for the Holy Roman Empire is a Charles de Bucquoy. Maximilian I, the Elector of Bavaria, he is not at this battle, but he has given the Catholic League general, the representative general from the Catholic League, orders here, basically overreaching orders. He's not at this battle. He is during this battle. He is in the Electoral Palanate trying to reconquer it. However, he does have some overarching leeway into what the army does. And the Catholic League general who is represented for the Catholic League is the Count Tilly. He will be called Tilly from now on. Because I'm not saying that entire name. That is a big name, and that is too many letters for me to read with my first grade education.
Wait, you can read?
Yeah. I was taught via candlelight in the basement of a winery.
I can't. Well, anyways, the thing another thing to point out is that this is, as stated earlier, this would be the first battle of the 30 Years' War, and the Holy Roman Empire, along with the Catholic League, are very. I'd say I would go as far to say they're pretty experienced. The troops they have on their side are trained, and now of course in medieval history you have the thing where you imagine every soldier is heavy infantry. They all have heavy armor and they're very well heavily trained. Kind of not, but nonetheless, every soldier on the Roman Empire's army or Holy Roman Empire's army is trained, nonetheless, and is experienced in their weaponry. Although the Bohemian forces are decently trained themselves, they mostly have experience doing mercenary work. That's the bulk of their force. Mercenaries. I've heard some people mention militia were involved with the Bohemians, which could just be more mercenaries, but someone that picked up a rifle and just joined their local mercenary group because they really wanted all the men they can get at this battle. The Bohemians, I believe, the Bohemians have one group of cavalry, not much, whereas the Holy Roman Empire have a good, decent amount of cavalry and a couple, I believe, a unit of dragoons, which dragoons are basically a hybrid between cavalry and regular infantry. They're very versatile. They can be used as cavalry and do footwork as infantry as well. And
not exactly. Both armies bring about a 60-40 split on infantry to cavalry ratio. When we get to the next slide, I'll bring that up. There are no dragoons here in the traditional sense. I will talk about that in a minute. They do have cavalry with firearms, but they're not dragoons. I'll bring them up in a minute. On the Bohemian Confederation side, the main commander is Christian of Anhalt. He is slightly experienced and from the Electoral Palanate, which is also where the Frederick V hails from, even though he is the king of Bohemia. Count Thurn, that is what I will call him instead of that entire thing, which I cannot pronounce. He is reasonably seasoned general. He had gotten a little bit of action earlier in the revolt when he sieged Vienna without any siege equipment. Isn't really his fault, but he expected them to surrender, and he didn't have any siege equipment, so he just left. No actual fighting happened. He just sort of showed up, said surrender. They said no. He left.
overall, the basic structure between these two armies, if this makes sense, a good comparison would be the in the American Civil War, it's like the Union Army versus the Confederate Army. The Union Army is decently seasoned with a huge industrial backing behind them, as well as an economy and government set up for war. The Confederacy is just formed. The Army has a lot of former U.S. military now deserters to the Confederate Army among their ranks, but they also have a lot of people that just joined about an hour ago, and they're basically taking what they can, and uh, would end up having to have a very downsized army because they're either training up a very downsized army because they're training up the new people, a lot of new people that joined. They need the experienced soldiers to train said new trainees, and then sometimes actually had to supplement ranks with basically militia because of how new this army was. Kind of the same deal going on here, where the Holy Roman Empire, as you could probably understand, is very industrialized for this kind of situation, and the Bohemian Confederation as a bit of an issue of organization, because organizing an army when you've just formed as a nation or as a confederacy is a very tough thing to do.
I like that point. However, just for a note, industrialization does not mean they had like heavy industry. There were no factories, although they have a lot more resources to convert into currency. So more farmland, more blacksmiths, more markets, more tax collectors, more
They had a bigger
capital. They
access
have more
to
capital.
yeah, they had a bigger access to for example, the Confederacy losing a cannon in this sense, the Bohemian Confederacy losing a confederation losing a cannon is much more detrimental to them than say the Holy Roman Empire losing a cannon, because uh, the resource stacking is much different.
The final Bohemian general, or the final general we're gonna that needs to be talked about is I had to do a little bit of research to confirm where this guy is. Actually, a considerable amount of research, or to find out where this guy was on the battlefield and what exactly he was supposed to be doing. Is Heinrich von Schlick? He has a funny name. He's weird because he is fighting his former employer. He was a general in the Holy Roman Empire army who, for this battle, changed sides to fight with the Protestants. And after this battle, he would rejoin the Holy Roman Empire. And no
So
one questioned it.
so he's a double traitor essentially.
No, he wanted to fight with the Protestants, and after they lost, he went back to fight with the Holy Roman Empire. He wasn't a traitor, from what I can determine. His entire goal for doing this was out of a religious reason, and when the Roman Empire needed him, he just went back. Why he did this, it baffles me, but I cannot see any sort of wrongdoing he does in the battle. He seems to be a relatively upstanding person. There's no other accounts I can find of this guy being a compulsive liar or something like that. He just, during the Bohemian Revolt, thought that the Bohemians or the Protestants were right in what they were doing, and decided to join them, which is weird.
Which is very interesting, and then it ends up going back to the Catholics.
Yeah, strange dude.
Mm.
So, their armies that they're bringing. You're gonna wonder, why is there a line separating these troops? This is because every single source, book, YouTube video, unless they're copying the Wikipedia, has different numbers, and it is baffling to me.
Yes, as stated earlier, European history is already complicated enough. It doesn't help the fact that it's not very well documented, mostly, anyways.
Well, and
Well,
even if it is
just-
documented, it's documented poorly,
yes.
or by more than one person with slightly different accounts of events. Now, the Holy Roman Empire had between 19 and 24,800 troops. Um, Keep in mind the ratio of cavalry to infantry is 40% cavalry to 60% infantry for both sides. And that is a estimate from what I have researched. I cannot find a definite answer to this is how many cavalry were bought, this is how many infantry were brought under any normal circumstance. There are some who will say, oh, there was 20,000 infantry and then there were 3,000 cavalry, or they will say there was 17,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. There is approximately a ratio for the amount of troops.
At this point, with all the research we've done, it's
An estimate.
somewhere in the middle.
It is somewhere between these numbers. With the cannons are fairly close, between 10 and 11 cannon. These are non-mobile cannons. These are probably something you would see closer to I'd say a
12,
6-pound
pounder.
yes, somewhere these are not heavy siege cannons. These are not like 4-pounders, or 2-pounders. These are field guns. However, they aren't moved from their positions. They are set up in pre-prepared positions and then are fired from there. Only turned. This is partially because the way the wheels, the way the weight is distributed in them. It is very hard to move these things around by hand, so they just sit where they are. The Bohemian Confederation, the general consensus is whatever the Holy Roman Empire brings, they bring less. And some say between 17,000 troops and 23,000 troops. Numbers fluctuate in there. However, that number is never higher than the Holy Roman Empire's troops. And I have no idea why they said 9. I have seen an account of 9 cannons and an account of 17 cannons, which I call baloney on, but the source was very good, so I'm concerned that they had a typo. I am tempted to believe that they wrote 7 cannons, but they wrote an extra 1 in there. But I'm not sure, so I have 17 cannons there. I question this highly. Everyone else says 9 cannons, 10 cannons, but 17 is an absurd amount of artillery. Now, that source could have also meant there were just the cannons around Prague and included them as well, because this battle happens relatively close to the city itself. But I call baloney on that number. And the amount of infantry that is out of the infantry that is brought, I would say that most of it is pike infantry and some kind of or some kind of firearm based infantry. There are other forms of infantry in this battle. However, they are predominantly pike and so like Matchlock or Arbricus right firearms. They're not technically rifles.
Yeah, what, Arc Corpus?
Yeah, arquebus. That's what I was talking about. Their matchlock rifles and arquebuses are effectively the same thing. I'll talk about it. There is a difference. I'm not saying that there isn't. And here's where we're going to talk about it. The equipment that both of these armies are bringing. We have pikes. These are roughly 10, 20 feet, 10 to 20 feet long, 20 feet long being the maximum. No one's really carrying anything much longer than that. The 10-foot pikes. These things are massive.
Yeah, they really only exist to it's essentially to create a wall of spikes so that the other enemy infantry movements don't want to get close. Right,
Also, it is very easy to kill cavalry with them.
yes, because if the cavalry charge you, well, you can just swing at them because they're at a very far range. Cavalry aren't usually armed with pikes at all. It's not a very good idea to do so. As such, cavalry usually have to get in close with a sword or a pistol. But it's easy to kill them when you have a stick that's 20 feet long and has a very sharp metal end on it.
Yeah. That and your enemy infantry can't get close because you will poke them before they can get within swinging range of their axe or sword.
Mm-hmm.
These pikes are all relatively the same. Some of the infantry bringing might have shorter pikes. Most of them are fielding what is common for that era. It is now also time to talk about the elephant in the room, the matchlock rifle. When I say matchlock rifle, I mean matchlock firearm. The matchlock just refers to the firing mechanism. And there is a slight difference between a matchlock rifle and an arquebus rifle. There are also, in quotation marks, carbines in this battle. And to what extent they exist, I have no idea how many are in this battle or how many of the cavalry actually had the carbines. But the sources constantly bring up either the horses having some kind of firearm that isn't just a rifle. They will say like a carbine or a harquebus carbine. A harquebus is also just another name. From what I've determined, it's another name. Whenever they say harquebus, it is either a arquebus or harquebus is either used as either another name for an arquebus rifle, or it is used as a horse-mounted variation of the arquebus rifle, which you could call a matchlock carbine or an arquebus carbine. There are slight differences, but for the sake of time, brevity of breath, these rifles are functionally the same. They have a trigger-based firing mechanism. They have gunpowder. They are single-shot firearms with a trigger mechanism that is ignited by some sort of string.
Generally, the most common firearm you find. The sources I have read on this state that although carbines existed, they didn't. The carbines are documented from archaeology reports stating that they were there. To what extent, no one knows. Most commonly, you're just going to find a wheel-lock, matchlock, or an arquebus rifle.
Even though harquebus, arquebus, and matchlocks are effectively all the same, there are slight differences, and the carbines may just refer to, or primarily, not may, they primarily refer to rifles with shorter barrels. Either they are intentionally built like this or they are modified to be like this. However, there are one thing that I've determined through all the sources I've read is there are no wheellock rifles in this engagement. There are wheellock pistols.
Right, and that's what I meant when I said wheellocks. I said wheellocks in general.
Yeah,
as a pistol.
yeah. And this is partially because both armies are bringing a plethora of different type of infantry and cavalry from all corners of Europe, and they are bringing everything under the sun. Whatever they had is there. Some of the cavalry does not have firearms. I've heard descriptions of light cavalry, and I assume that they are operating with some kind of sword and maybe a like short lance. There's descriptions of Polish cavalry here and some Hungarian cavalry, all of which are bringing different things, but everything is relatively consistent. Both armies are bringing these. So it's not like the Bohemians only have lance cavalry. Both have got some sort of firearms, both sides have got lance-based cavalry. Both sides have heavy knights. So these are cavalry with the mounted infantry has a lot of armor on them. The horses are relatively armored. Some of them having pistols, some of them not having pistols. It is a real toss-up on between the sides.
If anything, it's a hodgepodge. I think and there's another issue that also just slipped my mind, and I just remembered the fact that around this time, uh, during peace, you could say peacetime, the army was relatively small because they were expensive to maintain. So it was, well, yes, and the army was small, but relatively, but although relatively they weren't compared to the Bohemian army, but you have to understand that land. You have to the Holy Roman Empire has a lot more land to secure. As such, the flexibility of the forces they have compared to the land they have, the concentration is not as good. It wouldn't, and it's going to take a little bit for them to bring up and to build such a large army to where they could have a very, I guess you could say, not specialized force, but it's just the Holy Roman Empire. That's why you see such a hodgepodge. I chalk up the hodgepodge on the Bohemian side to more of desperation, and much like the Confederacy of the Civil War, of the American Civil War in the 1800s, grabbing whatever you can because it's what's that? You're a 16-year-old with a rifle. Get on the front lines there, bud. Oh, what's that? You're a 14-year-old. Here's a drum. But with the Bohemian, excuse me, the Holy Roman Empire, with them, I chalk it up to just they have to secure all the borders of their land because it's very possible that another nation from somewhere would see the Holy Roman Empire and the Bohemians going at it and decide, it's my time to invade for no reason, and just would want to invade either the Bohemians or the Holy Roman Empire and try to take over for some reason, which you would think would not happen, but it happens sometimes. It's very weird.
Unfortunately, this is exactly what happens.
Yes, again, European history. It doesn't make sense, and that's the documented history, and so that's why there's such a hodgepodge on both sides,
and with some of these forces being separated over a large area, keep in mind all of these guns and a lot of this very technical equipment is handmade. There's not a factory. Factories really don't exist yet. All of these guns are made by gunsmiths. All of the swords are made by blacksmiths. And if your army is over by Poland and your other soldiers are over by Saxony, the cities that they're stationed around have got different smiths. So every gun's a little bit different because the smith is a little bit different. There's general consistency in it's a rifle with a uh, similar firing mechanism as a principle, but as these troops are pushed into an army together, they're coming from different stations and bringing the stuff that they've acquired in their area. And some of these firearms and swords and armor is personal equipment. They're soldiers by trade. They have bought all of their equipment, and some of them are given equipment. Um,
One thing is it's as building off of what Kento was stating about the lack of factories, is that one of the biggest advancements in firearm technology was industrialization. This allowed, and also machinery. See, here's a little thing I want to go on a tangent with. Not for long, but it's like that stupid meme where it's I'm gonna go if you could go back in time and take something with you to impress everyone. What are you gonna take? And you know everyone's like, oh, an iPhone or whatever, and they take it back in time, and then they say, how do we make electricity, or how do we make the phone? Well, I don't know. That's the thing. We didn't. You can't just say take a 1911 pistol. I'm going somewhere with this. Don't worry about it. And go back in time and say, okay, here's a modern pistol. This thing is very good. It shoots 45 caliber. It's almost the size of your rifle caliber. It's big. It's funny. It goes bang and it can load. If you have one in the chamber, it can fire 9 rounds and load it automatically. You just have to cock this little funny little hammer mechanism on the back. Um, yeah, they can't build it. They simply don't know how to build it because they don't have the machines to build it. The biggest thing that the biggest blessing to the firearm manufacturing scene was industrialization, because because the rifle barrel or the barrel on a modern pistol wasn't handmade. That was done by a machine. A machine had to drill that out. You didn't forge. You didn't. You had a very tight tolerance, and with industrialization, it allowed the building of machines to build equipment to a certain tolerance, to a certain size, and it streamlined production, which allowed them to produce even relative small nations to produce a ludicrous amount of firearms compared to what they could to a the amount of firearms a small country can produce now is almost the equivalent to a massive medieval country because of industrialization, and that's why, as stated earlier, the armies were actually kind of local, right? If they're protecting, they protected their general area from where they were from because the weapons that they would have would be made in that town. And it's not exactly a great idea to, although this still happened a lot, to have a guy with a rifle that was made, or a type of weapon or a firearm made in one town, and then take him 50 miles south and station him at another town because his rifle is a bit different. And the consistency is going to be knocked to the side.
I will say there is a slight issue with that. So parts were not interchangeable for weapons at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have it to where, well, it depends, of course, but for most weapons, you didn't have interchangeable parts, of course. It wasn't the Industrial Revolution to where you could mass produce things. So every weapon was handmade. Therefore, every weapon was different. So you couldn't just get a part or purchase a part from a blacksmith. They had already made in attached to your weapon. It had to be specially made for your equipment. So let's say you broke something like the actual matchlock operation. You'd have to have somebody to take it apart and rebuild that piece specifically so that it works for your weapon again. Which is one reason why that would be a big problem if anything of your weapon broke. It's just not not to the point where well, of course, when they eventually started making weapons with
Right.
full production.
And that's why the basic concept of firearms would be essentially powder, protectant, projectile in tube, because it's a very versatile platform. Because as we just stated, they're all handmade, so you can't exactly make machined barrels or rifled barrels for your weapons at this point, because it's just you simply cannot make those. And if you do, well, then you get into the problem of you have to make ammunition now very consistent and precise at certain sizes, whereas they kind of, as long as it could fit in the barrel. Here's a ball of here's a lead ball.
Mm-hmm. Lead is also relatively easy to shape and won't scratch up the insides of the barrel. So,
one way, or the way that I know of that they used to actually make musket balls, because they were perfectly circular, basically, is they would have tall towers, and they would drop off molten lead from the top of the towers. And as they would fall, they would cool, and there'd be a bucket of water at the bottom. So they would fall in these perfect circles, and then land in the bucket and completely cool off by the time they got to the bottom. It's a very cool
that's
process.
neat.
They made them very circular, and because of the different heights or the different amount that you poured, you would have a certain size musket ball. Very cool, very cool.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm trying to remember. I know. I believe they did in America, at least. Civil War stuff. I'm not entirely sure. That's a vague memory. But also with that, you can use different sized musket balls, albeit like slightly bigger, but then oftentimes smaller. I know they normally use wadding. You won't fully engage the rifling in a weapon if the round is too small, because it's supposed to glide along the rifling, rotating the object. So with a rifle, you wouldn't have just a musket ball. It'd be, counterintuitive, because you're just rotating an orb in the air, which is probably already rotating partly anyways, if, with just a musket. So when they had the mini ball, which, it's named after the guy, the guy. The mini ball, it was shaped more like what we see as a modern bullet, or what we have now more.
Mhm.
So it was surprisingly good at expanding upon hitting a flesh target. Either way, they eventually got shaped like that for use of the rifling. It helped a lot. You would actually be able to spin the mini ball, allowing it to fly a lot more accurately. And while it probably was possible to rifle a barrel, it wasn't very effective, I wouldn't imagine, unless you actually had ammunition that would work as such. So I know at some point they came up with the system, or they did a couple times, where they used clay, and they would put it into a mold, and they would basically make a clay mold of a bullet, a mini ball specifically, and they'd shoot that down the barrel instead of, well, lead if they didn't have it. But eventually they could cast the little mini ball. It was a little bit easier.
Mhm.
Can't really drop this from a tower. They don't really come out looking right if you do that.
Yeah. That's a good point, because um, all of the guns here are using the standard ball, and some of these balls are, hypothetically speaking, if you had a 44 caliber matchlock rifle, some of these balls are 42 caliber, they're 41, they're 43, 44, they're all over the place. As long as it will go down the barrel, the ball will be ejected from the gun, as
Yes.
long as the pressure is high enough.
At cost of velocity and whatnot. You see that a lot in shotgun slugs, and, well, a lot of shotgun ammunition. That's why sabos will they use a lot of different things for that. It helps, but
Yeah, the
that's
wadding.
one reason you would have wadding. Yeah, that's one reason why you have little cotton pads. They cut little pieces of fabric, and that would go down the barrel with your round. And of course, that didn't. It did a good bit. It would also help just with it helps a lot with fitment. Also help that your musket ball didn't fall out the end of your barrel when you went to go maneuver.
Yeah, that's why shotguns have wadding, and that's the blunderbusses didn't have wadding. And when I'm talking, your wadding for your like modern shotguns is the plastic bit that follows your that contains your BBs until it exits the gun, so that your BBs have the highest possible muzzle velocity that you can have, and you don't have pressure escaping around the wadding too much. But yes, getting back to wheellock pistols, these are extremely expensive compared to Matchlock's rifles. They utilize a sort of kind of like a wind up toy. You wind up a spring on the side of the gun, and upon pulling the trigger, the spring will spin around a metal piece, and the metal piece scraping and the wheel lock will spark, and the spark will ignite the powder in the chamber. These pistols are very complex compared to all of the Matchlock and Heart Arquebus firing mechanisms. These pistols are very short range. However, the cool thing is that your wick, which is the piece of string in the arquebus rifles and matchlock rifles that is actually on fire, that gets dunked into the pan of black powder that ignites the powder into the chamber, that is covered, and you don't have to worry about managing your wick while you're on your horse or if you're walking around. So you can simply wind it up and ready the pistol and pull the trigger, and it should fire if the sparks make it into the barrel, which they do. There's these do fall out of fashion when flintlock pistols come out, because they are a little bit how do I put this, annoying to use, and a little bit tedious, but it's easier than a matchlock rifle to manage.
Right. Overall, wheel locks are just very cumbersome, tedious, and complicated to set up. It's here's a good comparison. It's like trying to operate a '90s PC versus a modern PC. Right? Just running calculator on your '90s PC, you have to install the program and tell it exactly what to do. You have to hold its hand the entire time, and on a modern PC, you just boot up your calculator.
Mm-hmm.
It simplifies, and it reduces the time. It reduces the already. I mean, don't get me wrong. Flintlocks rifles specifically have a very, compared to modern firearms, of course, have a very long reload rate, and yet it simplified the process even more from a wheel lock.
Mm. But a wheel lock, especially on horse, is a whole lot easier to operate than managing your wick and trying to reload a matchlock, either carbine or if you're operating a matchlock rifle off of a horse.
Right.
I guess we'll move on to the next thing, the swords. The swords here, everyone is basically using the same thing, except there are some soldiers on the infantry and cavalry who are using swords that could best describe as like they are sabers. They are slightly curved. They're not extremely curved. However, they are curved and they're meant for slashing actions. And the every other infantry is, if you look on the center photo of the pikemen, all of them have these straight swords. The straight sword is, from what I can tell, the most predominant thing used in the Battle of White Mountain as far as a sword is concerned. These are mostly for stabbing so that you can stay as far away from your opponent as possible. Because for a slash, you need to basically hit them with not the very tip of your blade, but a little bit further down. But if for a stabbing motion, you can poke them at the very end of your reach, so you can stay as far away from the enemy as humanly possible. As you know, even though you don't have a pike, you are fairly close to your enemy. For like stabbing and lunging attacks. The cannons, like we had brought up earlier, these are 10, 20 pound. When I say pound, the cannons are not 20 pounds. They are probably closer to 1,000 pounds.
It's the weird way of, and you would think that, like I did, that pounds is talking about the weight of the shells or the munitions. No, it's not. This is just the name. The poundage is not a measurement, right? And this is, and the British will make fun of the Americans for not using the metric system. But here's the thing: when it comes to incredible precision, America recognizes that the metric system is the best for exact precision. If you look at tanks or in cannons, we use millimeters because it's precise, right? We don't use sixteenths or eighths. We use millimeters for cannons, and yet even up until the 50s and past, the British were using pounds. Pounds means nothing. It doesn't tell you how big the cannon is or what it just tells you it's just a representation. It's just a name, pounds, even though you would think it's a representation of a measurement. No, it's not. It's the same thing how the British use the British weigh people in stone. This person weighs 4 stone. What does stone mean?
What does stone mean?
What is stone? Like what even is stone? At least we use a measurement, pounds. Like, we don't just use stone.
Everyone
Sorry,
knows what a pool is.
Hey, yeah, like how deep's the pool? It is 35 leagues deep. What is a league?
Oh, measuring temperature. They don't use Celsius. They use what's it? Uh,
They better not be using Kelvin.
No, they wouldn't be using Kelvin, probably, actually. For measuring the temperature of something, they're not using Celsius. They're using I'm trying to think of one.
But getting back to it, these
Yes, but anyways.
cannons are what we would consider normal field guns for 17th and 18th century combat. They are nothing particularly special. They are firing standard iron balls. Cannons themselves are probably close to a ton. They're not maneuverable. They are meant to be set out in the field and just left to their own devices.
So pretty much like modern day field artillery. If
Well,
we're gonna be
no,
like,
modern day field artillery, you would move that stuff around pretty effectively.
well, no, what I'm saying is, like, just for like an individual engagement, it's like they don't move much. Like, they just sit there and fire. Like, that's about all they could do. I'm talking about like M777s, or it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of the same concept. Like the concept of like for a single engagement of battery fired artillery, such as these 20-pounders and M777s today, pretty much the same thing. They don't really move much.
Sit out in a field and shoot until you're told to stop shooting, and then put the thing back on the truck and drive away.
Yes, or disassemble it, which they do, and they have cranes for that. They're very heavy. Anyways, these cannons are basically siege guns. Now, one thing to note is about cannons now is that apart from a few examples in history, I know in the 15th century the Koreans had a high explosive cannonball, which was a 1 second. And the Koreans using a high explosive shell, though that was in the 15th century, but that was a bit iffy because they sometimes could explode upon exiting the cannon, so it wasn't very reliable. Unless you're directly hit by the cannonball, you're probably going to be fine. I'm sure having a very heavy iron ball slung at very high speeds or high speeds hit the ground next to you doesn't feel good, but unless it directly touches you, you're gonna be fine. You get that image you see in movies where a cannon shoots a guy. He's 3 feet away. Shoots near a guy. He's 3 feet away, and he dies from an explosion. No, that's not how that works.
These do not have explosive filler. The only way you're dying to this thing is if it directly hits you, or if the ball hits the ground and the ball breaks and fragments from there, or like hits rock and starts like ejecting debris.
Spalling. If it starts shrapneling and spalling, that's when it could kill you as well.
But that would be in its flight path already, so you're probably already gonna get hit with the cannonball.
So it's just these things aren't very compared to what we have. Going back to M777s, not very deadly compared to those things, but they're still important nonetheless because if anything, they not only are, as stated earlier, they are very morale breaking because again, you just had a very heavy iron ball smack the ground next to you, and now you need to pull out your brown pants.
Yeah, we have a serious brown pants moment on aisle 3. There is one saving grace to the cannons here, and that would be
Grape
these.
shot.
These are tercios. This is the formation that both sides are going to use here. The Holy Roman Empire is going to use from what is described most as the Spanish version of this, and the Bohemians using the Dutch style. Both of them are basically using the same formation, just slightly different. And this is insanely well packed together infantry, so if you land a good cannon shot, you can take out like 13 dudes who have all just had their bodies disintegrated by a like 30-pound bowling ball sized object that just punched through all of their chests.
Yeah. Despite what people tell you, even though you join the Marine Corps, you're not immortal.
Yeah, no one's immortal. But the Terthios, and it doesn't look like it's supposed to be Terthios, but this is apparently how you're supposed to pronounce this thing. These are basically quadrilateral cubes of humans that the Spanish determined in like the 14th and 1400s and 1500s to be peak fighting formation. The idea is that your cube of musketeers and pikemen can block a cavalry charge that threatens your firearm infantry, and the entire formation is roughly 3,000 to 2,500 men in the entire thing. So the little diagram I have on the right would everything with an F is firearm infantry, everything in the M blue zone is musketeers, and P in the middle is pikemen. The idea is you're a static defense that can defend your firearm infantry. Some descriptions of this have the firearm infantry moved around or integrated into the cube, the Borg cube.
Mm-hmm.
But the amount of pikemen to musketeers varies heavily. And when these things first started showing up on battlefields, they're closer to 3,000. But towards the end of their reign, these things have fewer infantry, and usually some of these are on this particular battlefield. The majority of them are probably around 2,500 men per tertio.
Right. And this goes back to that line warfare kind of thing, which is something we'd see all the way up until even up to until the Second World War, where it was um you had large formations of just flesh on one line. And one thing now you of course you and you had instances now you did have cavalry that if a breakthrough were to occur on this line, that they would try to respond to that. But it's mostly most of your bet is on the guys at the front, and it it's not exactly two large groups of people clashing, but it also kind of is. It's a very weird thing.
Yes, it's rather weird when you first look at it. It's like why are they forming the quadrilateral?
Mm-hmm. It's
And
random.
uh, the answer is primarily because during the medieval ages, so the several hundred years before this, the biggest threat on the battlefield is cavalry. If you're in a battle in the medieval age and you don't have good cavalry, prepare to die.
Uh, and,
Um,
and 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 that's another thing, that breaking the line was incredibly important. Of course, you had cavalry to try to contain that, but even with melee weapon, it's kind of tough. And that's why the British trained their cavalry, and that with that ending in the Second World War, whenever they're trained to see a breakdown in the enemy ranks, charge in and get behind everything and cause as much havoc. And that's
mm,
kind of what cavalry did medieval all the way up, um, kind of during the First World War, but mostly all the way up until that point.
because if you isolate units where they don't have a command structure talking to them, and they don't have good local captains and leaders, telling them where to move, they will quickly lose morale and flee the battlefield. And as a
Yeah.
commander, that is something you don't want happening.
Yes.
And for extremely light infantry to fight cavalry, it was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they are a rank of heavy knights and you are three peasants with a pitchfork, prepare to die because there's nothing you can do to really hurt them.
I hope you have your affairs in order,
Mm.
because
Although,
although this didn't exist at the time, your life insurance policy will soon be cashed.
yes, your wife will be soon be receiving a check.
That the gov that of which these governments at this time would immediately just take.
Hmm.
Oops, I got
But
lost
the
in translation.
oh, but I don't know where I went.
Wait, isn't that just our modern government? Anyways,
Oh, uh,
so we have
but
these are the basic defenses on both sides, and this is also kind of a product of the gentleman warfare, if you will, where it's which again would go all the way up until the First World War, where the emphasis was on your officers. Officers were the army. The peasants were their your peasants were essentially your infantry, and you commanded them. And how dare they speak back to you? Because your officers, you're ordained by God, and you command these men. These men are completely subservient to your will, and they should commit every order to your exact imagination. You can see a lot of problems with this. And that, as stated earlier, if you have a bad commander or a bad officer who thinks very highly of himself and thinks you're just going to sort out the issue, it's going to be a tough fight. And God help you.
Yeah, say a short prayer for you, yourself, and those around you.
Again, at least you have life insurance. Well, actually, historically, you didn't at this time.
Mm-hmm. So now that we've talked about that, it is time to talk about the battle map. What actually happened in this duel of the fates? Now, I'm not saying that everyone's wrong. Don't take this video as a personal insult to like YouTubers like history and generals. If I remember if I'm saying his channel name correctly, he has a very nice video on this battle and the lead up to it. There's a couple of other YouTubers who have a very um, nice videos.
Though this battle is a very niche subject.
Yes, this battle is a very niche subject, and the information on it can be swung either way. There are certain things that don't make a lot of sense about it, and that everyone basically has their own story of it.
But it's also one of
And
the things that a bunch of things don't make sense because either it's the interpretation that doesn't make sense, or the fact that this is medieval history we're talking about. So a lot of
yes.
it's not going to make sense because it's already medieval history.
Mm-hmm. Now, so the battle map you're looking at is topographically correct. The Bohemian forces are located on the White Mountain and on the grounds of the Star Palace. I forget the Czech name for what this place is called. It's got a really nice name. This place doesn't exist anymore. It's a town, except the Star Palace. Star Palace still exists. You can go visit it.
Yo,
Book your trip to the Czech Republic right now via Trivago. We're not sponsored.
yeah, unfortunately, we're not sponsored. Call us. But White Mountain, to put in perspective, there's a reason why there's only one elevation line on this map. Is because White Mountain is a bit of an overstatement. White Mountain is the Battle of White Mountain would be more accurately stated as the Battle of a slight white elevation.
Mm-hmm. Now, the mountain is not actually white. It is in reference to the soil being white or whiter than normal.
It's a very clay. It's from what I've heard. It's a very clay. It's a white clay. It's kind of what
Mm-hmm.
the soil is. It's a very fertile farmland. That's
Okay.
the reason why a town exists. It's kind of like the clay you get in the southeast. You have red clay, which is really tough and dense, very nutritious though, but stains everything. And then you have white clay, which is very nutritious as well for plants, but it's very soft and smells.
Wait, nutritious. Can I eat some?
Uh, Nutritious for plants, not for you. You can try. You might need to get your stomach pumped.
The other thing to note is that the hill itself is roughly a 60 foot, uh, 60 feet from its highest point to the normal ground of the area. It is effectively a very large hill that it is sort of plateaued. With where Thurn is in the south having the lowest rate of lowest incline. So while towards the front it may be like a 30-degree incline over by Thurn, it's probably closer to 15 degrees change in elevation the 30 and the 15, those are for example. I don't know the exact incline compared to where the Holy Roman Empire forces are. And the other thing I would like to mention is I was going to have the boxes for solid colors are infantry, half solid, half half and half, with half of it being white, is cavalry. Cannons are the black triangles. The cannons are not the number of cannons; those are just where they appeared to have been located. Um, Now, I was going to have it where the regiments would have their own box. However, with the amount of troops that they have and how I have seen it described and organized, your individual detachments of cavalry and infantry are displayed with each of the solid squares representing about 1 to 2 tercios worth of infantry. With some representing 1, some representing 2. Given that we don't know exactly how they were dispersed, they're generally dispersed like this.
Right, and so
And
now what we're gonna do now is give our general interpretations of how the battle went. I'll start. I have the least detailed, to be frank with you, all of you, is because I do not. I didn't do nearly the same amount of research, but from what I could tell, the battle starts with the cavalry with the Holy Roman Empire cavalry moving from with the whole general laying down a bit of a siege, but then having the infantry move forward. The cavalry is mostly just kind of hanging around, waiting for a breakthrough or a breakdown to take advantage of, while some other cavalry uh, on the Holy Roman Empire side is flanking around to the south, with Bohemian cavalry also charging down the middle. Now, one thing to note why I stated that there was some militia, you could call militia, in this battle, is because when the cavalry charge down the middle for Bohemia, they do get their butts handed to them on a silver platter with a nice silver chalice of wine to go with it. But they ran, and with that being said, the Bohemian infantry, once the infantry got close, the Roman infantry got real close, and the cavalry charged the middle and didn't go well, and they turned around. The cavalry in actuality were running back to command because you don't exactly have a field infantry radio with you. You can only have you can only get information from the high command via messages and notes and whatnot. So so the cavalry is returning back to their lines in order to receive more information, and this is happening across the board. And I bring up the case of the cavalry going down the middle in particular is because when they took the brunt of the blows, and when coming back, imagine this: you're in these essentially a trench, not a trench, but it's essentially a defensive position, and you're protecting against cavalry as well as other infantry trying to poke at you, and also you see a very large horde of infantry coming at you, even though numbers wise you're relatively the same numbers in comparison, and then you see your cavalry run in, not go well, and they're running away. Well, this at some point cause a breakdown in ranks, which allows the Roman cavalry to see this, take advantage, and then charge into the lines and start splitting the forces up and start carving them to pieces. Even though the cavalry weren't retreating, they were just withdrawing more than anything to assess and then be to be
um,
flexible to assess the situation and then be applied where they're needed. It causes a little bit of panic on the Bohemian side.
I'm gonna that was a lot. You went super into that, but I'm gonna start from the beginning, because I almost kind of got lost there for a little bit. A brief explanation. I probably should have done this to begin with. For the Holy Roman Empire side, in the early morning hours, they cross the Blue Line, which is a small river. It's not very big, and they form up beneath the Bohemian forces. The Bohemian forces have Schlick up towards the north. He's either between the Star Palace or he is at the Star Palace commanding. Analt, he is not in the back line. He is around where the two cannons are positioned towards the north of the mountain ridge, and Thurn is in the south with the cannon furthest south. Now, it should be I need to briefly state that what I'm about to describe is one of the worst defeats I've ever seen that should not have happened. And it is entirely because it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense for the defenders to react. If you abide by the normal rules of war, the Protestant forces did everything correctly, and it shot them in the foot because they were unable to react to a changing situation that turned the tables on them. Prague is a little bit too far away to put on the map, but it is several miles away. It is a considerable distance, but when you consider you have to walk it, but in a geographical sense, it's fairly close for us looking down on a map. And Frederick V has ordered Analt, who's, from what I can see, the in command and has the majority command of this army, to fight a pitched battle against the Holy Roman Empire and defeat them. Defend Prague by setting up in a position where you have the advantage and defeat them. So he finds this location. This is about where the Holy Roman Empire is going to cross, and he sets up on a high ground and begins entrenching himself along the line of battle, or along the line of battle that he wants to have. There is a story. I did read a story, kind of comedic story, where the troops that the commanders order entrenchment tools to be brought up, so shovels, pickaxes. However, when they get the tools to the places they want to entrench, the tools are broken. I have no idea if this is true or not. But even if they are, the only entrenchments that might have been dug are the cannons, because the infantry is not entrenched, and they have no extra fortifications. And the Star Palace, even though it says it almost looks like a fort, it is not. It is effectively someone's home and has no defensible properties other than being on elevated terrain where infantry and cavalry are stationed. Behind the Bohemian line with the infantry line with interspersed cavalry, we have a reserve of, I've heard it described as Hungarian mercenaries and just spare cavalry that they had on hand. These, I have no idea who is in the command of them, other than that they are listening to Analt. as their commander. I've got no idea if these are purely being led by their individual captains and going along with a plan that Anult has made and has basically just ordered them to be reserves. So the captains assume that to attack when they need to reinforce somewhere in the line. Tilly and Buquois sit up in front of them, just inside of cannon range, and begin opening fire with cannons at the Protestants. This cannon fire I've seen described from just about all the sources I've seen as ineffective and didn't do much. These, because they're up on a hill and you're shooting up a hill at a target you can't really see from down at the bottom of it, they are basically just wasting ammo. But it keeps the Protestants from coming down the hill. Buquois takes his cavalry and his infantry and begins marching up the slope at Thurn specifically. Thurn has a detachment of cannons. He has some horse, and he has several. I've read described as Dutch style tercios, or a Dutch style formation. I'm not sure what formation they're in, but they do respond to Buquois' advance, and they form up to fight them head on. Now, I believe Thurn is trying to set up so that he could have reinforcements come in behind him. However, what Anult and Schlick are looking at is Tilly's force. Tilly's force does not move. It sits there. This is where we're getting into a little bit of what I'm thinking happened. Tilly is sitting there at the bottom of the hill, basically sitting as bait for Anult. If Anult moves his forces down to Buquois, he will not have force to fight Tilly. And Tilly is sitting there on the low ground, and if he is able to fight him with Tilly coming up the center of his line, he should be able to win. But he sits there. Now, all the while, there is a cavalry charge. Apparently under the command of Christian of Anult's son, apparently, who winds up getting imprisoned after the charge. He gets captured during the charge that Painful brought up. That it is from the reserves to help Thurn as the soldiers are seeing the horror that is about to unfold. Because half of the Holy Roman Empire's army is bearing down on a third of the Protestant force. These aren't great odds, but when you consider that they are of slightly higher quality and that the other portion of the Protestant army is not reacting, there is a massive morale issue. And shortly after contact is first made between the tercios, the firearm infantry and cavalry that is fighting, the cavalry that has charged down at Buquois under Anult's son is defeated very badly. They are basically running off the battlefield. The rest of Thurn's army begins to break and flee, and at that point Anult has just lost a third of his army, and Tilly begins to move on Schlick. From what I can determine, Anult no one really fights on the slope, the main slope of the hill, where the rate of change in topography is at its greatest, where Anult wants to fight, because his enemy didn't fight where he wanted to. And at this point, he now has Buquois bearing down on his side, and Schlick is outmanned and outgunned and is being run off the battlefield by Tilly. And at this point, the entire Protestant force breaks and runs away, leading to this. This is bad. This is awful. This is atrocious. The Holy Roman Empire loses between 650 and 700 troops. Some even say less. However, I am not entirely convinced of that. As that would mean that there was something even more catastrophic happening, and the Bohemians lose between 2,400 and 4,000 troops, with supposedly 1,000 of those casualties. So
Which
of the 4,000, 1,000 drowned in a river. I don't know if that happened. There are some battles where men have fled the battlefield, ran into rivers, and then drowned. However, I'm not positive that happened here.
Which, to be fair, for a battle of this period and of this nature, is actually for the losses, that's pretty good.
No, this is amazing for the Holy Roman Empire. They took basically no losses.
Yeah, and the Bohemians were not so fortunate.
No, they get routed all the way into Prague, and even at Prague, the city limits, they are not able to fight. In a day, the Holy Roman Empire has taken the Bohemian army, destroyed it, and then took one of the wealthiest cities that the Protestant forces have, and then sacked it. So they've
Yep.
stolen all of the money.
Right, and not just the money. I've heard that they've taken the like any smiths that were there. They also took them as well, and any raw materials as well.
Well, yeah, yeah, because it's their property now.
Exactly.
Oh
It's
wow, this stuff is all mine now.
yeah, it's like that. It's like that Megamind meme where it's just it's like thank you for well, I wouldn't say they were yearning to be saved by the Holy Roman Empire, but it's like no, more like under new management.
Hmm. Now, this is about the time that I need to bring up why I say that some of these depictions of the battle. What you're seeing right now in the background is a depiction of the battle where these two massive forces are meeting head on head. There is no way you're taking this light of losses and inflicting this much damage while doing this. I don't care how good your infantry says they are. I Now stuff like this might have happened, if you're in a choke point and you're in sort of like the Battle of Thermopylae, where the Spartans are just have an extreme quality disparity between the Persian infantry. However, everyone's bringing relatively the same equipment. They're wearing relatively the same amount of armor. They're wearing I think is it called saddlet? The popular chest plates. Salet, Salet.
Something like that.
They're all they're all equipped with relatively the same amount of equipment. They've all got pikes. Yep, they've all got rifles. They've all got pistols. They got swords, and they got cannons. Everyone has everything that they should need. And if they were to march up the center of this hill, they should have taken way more casualties than they did.
And
The
in
what?
fact, that was the plan. That was what Analt wanted.
Yes, that's because that would mean he wins.
Mm-hmm.
However, Buquois basically rolls up his army like a burrito and takes Prague same day. I am not convinced to any extent that the infantry where Analt is commanding even met combat. I do know that there is a one source that read that had something about some of the forces somewhere towards the northern end of the battlefield did fight. And I am assuming that would be Tilly's force.
Mm-hmm.
Unless Buquois really ran up the entire line or the entire ridge while Tilly went after the Star Palace. And keep in mind, the Star Palace isn't actually that valuable to Analt. It's just a anchor to his line. This is a quintessential uh, collapse of a line. There is and Analt does nothing about this because in his mind I believe the quote from Sun Tzu's The Art of War is, "Do not move unless your enemy is making a mistake." Or basically, don't move unless there is something to be gained. That is the rough translation. So there's no point in you advancing on an enemy if you're not going to gain anything out of it.
Right.
And in this case, Analt doesn't have anything to gain in the short run of moving his line because he is in the best position humanly possible. He has the high ground. His cannons, at the least, are dug in. He has cavalry. He has his reserves.
And if the enemy infantry want to approach him, they're gonna have to slug up the steepest incline on this elevation.
Mm-hmm. But he fails to see the massive problem that is currently unfolding in front of his own face. And from what I've read, from all of the sources, I've looked at a few German sources and tried to translate them. The the Bohemian forces at the northern end of the ridge don't move, from what I understand. They don't descend down the hill. There's no like charge at Tilly down this incline because this incline is horrid.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is the worst incline. You don't really want to fight on the side of it. You will perform better if you're coming down it, but it would be better for you to fight on the flat top and have the enemy sort of slug up it as they're taking matchlock fire and maybe have a cavalry charge down the hill. But that doesn't happen. At the point that Analt could have fought Tilly, or when Tilly's actually close enough to engage, he has Buquois breathing down his neck and is just past where Third's cannon emplacement was, and is approaching him relatively fast for what infantry formations moved during the pike and shot era, which wasn't fast. Partially because they're organized to be how do I put unsurroundable. Basically, the tercios, you can't really surround one, and if you try to attack one from, let's say, behind it, it can just look at you and poke you to death. There's no backside of these lines, or backside to a tercio.
Like, there's really no advantage to encircling these guys too much.
Well, I'm saying like attacking them from more than one angle. There's no real benefit.
Right. It's not as Like, let's say there are just two lines of infantry charging, smacking at each other. There's no really advantage to, unlike in that instance, there's no advantage to really getting behind them or using your cavalry to try to get at the rear of their formed line because, well, that's part of the design.
Now, there is advantage in like using your cavalry to go after the firearm infantry that are outside of the tertio. But then that infantry will just play. If you've ever had two people like trying to play tag and they've got a table in front of them, to use the tertio basically as the table.
Yep.
And while having like your force bear down on a tertio from two directions isn't bad, when you're looking at multiple of them bearing down on you from two directions, you're quickly going to want to leave the battlefield, and they do.
Mm-hmm. And which leads us to where they to this slide here, and where the ending at Prague, where they reach the outskirts, and Prague is promptly taken by the Holy Roman Empire. This battle here would mark the beginning of the 30 Years' War, and all in all, it was a bit of a devastating defeat for the Bohemian army, but it was a
A
very
bit.
very
This killed it. This was the end. This outright ended the entire revolt. Well, that and that there were other armies currently trying to repress pockets of resistance at this time.
but it was
Uh,
a massive morale and resource victory for the Holy Roman Empire.
mhm.
So I think we
And
mentioned this before, but it was because they were showing the rest of the armies or anyone who wanted to come against them. They were showing the Bohemian Confederation as an example of what not to do. Not to mess with the Holy Roman Empire for one.
mhm.
It's one of those things where, if the Holy Roman Empire wanted to send a message, they sent a message, and the messenger with it. I.e., they sent a message, and the severed head of the messenger also came with it.
Mhm.
It was a very overall a bad. It was a battle on an elevation. Yeah. Okay. Now, does
The
anyone have
battle
anything
of
else?
increased elevation. Well, we
The
have
the,
we
the
have one more
battle of Slight
slide.
Incline. Do we?
The battle of slight incline. That this is the repercussions. So after this, Frederick V is removed. Uh, he uh, he is in Prague when he sees his army come into the city, basically screaming and crying, and uh, says, "Okay, I'm going to leave the country now." He leaves the country. He takes refuge in the Kingdom of Sweden. Third and Anhalt survived this, and the son survived this. They all fled into a couple of different regions, mostly Sweden. And Schlick would rejoin the Holy Roman Empire's forces. Um, um, Now, the 30 Years' War, which this was the start of, um, would start off with the battle between the Kingdom of Sweden and the Holy Roman Empire over the land of Denmark, basically. And Sweden kicked their teeth. The kingdom kicked their teeth in. About half of the Holy Roman Empire territory got taken, other than they were pushed back. And then there was the French portion of the war, the entire 30 Years' War could be an entire brief, and we could do one if the audience wants it. I'm sorry, I accidentally changed the slides there. If you're want to see more of the 30 Years' War, please comment and say, "Oh, I would like some more," or "There's a particular battle." Uh, there's a lot of cool battles in the 30 Years' War, especially because one of the Swedish generals is the first one to basically figure out how to properly have a mobile artillery unit, and is the first time Europe sees mobile artillery pieces on the battlefield that would later become commonplace. And there are a lot of neat lessons to be learned. If there is a particular topic you want to see, please comment it down. No comment is, or no, nothing you could say in history is not necessarily not interest. If you, I can't word. If there is something you want to hear about in history and us go over and explain, please comment it, as we enjoy all of well, at least I enjoy all of history. There's not really a topic that you could suggest that wouldn't be interesting or couldn't be made interesting to discuss.
Everything has its own levels of shenanigans associated with it. It's just inevitable with history because, well, we're dealing with humanity here. Though I do want to point out one thing about history that people don't understand, that people talk about history as if you're talking about facts and entirely factual arguments and whatnot. Not really. Kind of, yeah. This battle should serve, or rather the history surrounding it should serve as an example of, you're not going to get that. It's a lot of it is interpretation of the data, because you have very conflicting information, and this happens almost everywhere in history, even in modern history. It happens all of the time. It's something you can't avoid.
Mm. But it's sort of the detective work that goes along with it that makes it so interesting.
It's what makes it fun. Well, fun to us. I don't know. A lot of people say that we don't have lives. Kind of agree with them, but
I haven't seen the sunlight in 37 years.
Wait, you see the sunlight?
The sunlight? What's that?
What was that? I'm just. I don't see the sunlight. I don't. That's not my contract.
Me occasionally leaving my domicile to visit somewhere where there's a book.
Hey, this is coming, but to say that we enjoy this is coming from the guy who, at an estate sale, which, by the way, this estate sale was at a former history professor's home, found a report curated in 1944 of the Second Division's summary of operations during the World War, which, I kid you not, there are charts, maps, and an entire report of what exactly the Second Division did, the American Second Division did in the in the First World War in 1918 from it was September to it was October to November of 1918 in the Verdun near the Verdun area. I lost my mind. Right, I was so excited over maps. I didn't even know I could get this excited over maps, and yet here I am.
Oh, you know perfectly well that you would get excited over a map.
No, I didn't know. I didn't know I was excited over maps, and then I picked this up and I see a map. I'm like, yes, yes. And this is in pristine condition. Like, bro, I kid you not. Like, it's like one of those things where it's like a turn on a woman that you didn't know you had, but then you see it and it's you have it.
Oh yeah.
But except it's like me. It's someone's like, I'm like, oh Oh yeah, so you're opening a Playboy? No, I'm opening a map, dog. What are you talking about?
Bro, I'm looking at logistics charts. Look at these charts, man.
Bro, look at all the movements. But yeah, so well, with that out of the way, you can tell. I'm pretty sure at this point, anyone watching this is saying, "You're a nerd." You're right, and we enjoy this. So please leave a comment down below. I'm not gonna say smash and smash that like button, but
Please smash that like button and, make sure to whack that subscribe.
um, but
I
uh,
can't
but
even take that seriously. I'm so
but
sorry.
if you do enjoy this type of content, uh, do consider subscribing. And grace us with a subscribe and then place a like on this video.
Mm.
Now,
And a lot of history is analysis.
mm,
For me, for the group, looking at what happened after the battle, looking at after action reports, what people said happened. If you read just a Wikipedia article and you say, okay, they won, well, how did they win? And if people start saying, oh, well, they just marched up the hill and they won, well, how is that possible? How in the world do you take less casualties on an attack against someone who's said they're well defended? Well,
right.
extra context and a little bit of imagination can give you a result that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Not
And
everything makes sense, but trying to make sense of the things. How possibly did this happen? Because, like I brought up earlier, I don't think directly that history and generals. Really nice YouTuber. I love watching the squares and rectangles move around in the battlefield. Best thing I've ever seen. Yeah, let's go. The red squares have encircled the blue squares. Let's go! But this is an explanation that makes sense. How can we make sense of it? And why did they happen?
one thing you need to do about in history is study how people would react in a situation, right? And that's why you always have to take a look at the perspective. That's why I noted the fact that you're an infantry guy. You're being surrounded, and 2/3 of the entire enemy force is bearing down on your position, and your cavalry force just got their rears handed to them and are now running away. You don't exactly feel good. So it's always you have to place yourself in the shoes of uh, of the people on the ground. Now, I will say this: reenactments are a general. If you're looking for just behavior and how people generally would react in a certain situation, reenactments can be a very good source of that. Now, of course, the academics would scoff at this idea that that's not how that works because you need to have factual evidence. It's like, well, wouldn't
You
reenact?
need to actually have 27,000 reenactors per side slug it out on a field.
Yeah, but it's just it goes back to history's all down to interpretation. We tried but there's a thing we call the lazy historian who, and I'm not saying that this is uh history in general. So I'm not saying that that's him, but I'm just referencing the general lazy historian who, again, the Wikipedia warrior who looks at Wikipedia, says, "Yep, that's accurate," and now all of a sudden, well, yeah, that's how you
Like,
could.
for example, there is a recording, there's a YouTube video about the Battle of White Mountain. It is literally just a robot reading the Wikipedia article.
Yep. And if that's not the
That is
antithesis,
lazy.
that is the lazy historian in its final form, right? And the lazy and the antithesis of the lazy historian is someone who looks at it, who does a 5 minute Google search, says, "Yeah, that's accurate," and doesn't try to find sensible information that would contradict that. Because part of being a historian is finding information that contradicts what you've just read, so you can try. So you look at both sides' answers.
Mhm.
and it's a very difficult. It's I won't say it's very difficult. It's just you have to understand the period and there's a lot to understand than just two lines smashed together.
Mhm.
And
And
so,
I
but
recommend you watch some of the other White Mountain videos. Some of them have got a lot of good information, and some of them um, bring forward a lot of the background history as to what happened with the Bohemian Revolt. Like I said, what brought about this was complete and utter madness.
hmm it's just like medieval history. Like this is one of the calmer examples of this.
Mhm. This almost reads like someone wanted to have a war or a revolt, but that is just history.
Yes.
That's why we need to learn from it, because there are sometimes idiots who are in charge of making history. And then it backfires horribly because, once again, they are idiots.
It's what's it? If those who try to there's a statement that it's something along the lines of those who try to forget the past are doomed to repeat it.
Mhm. And
Yeah, that's
history, while not repeating itself, rhymes. There's the way of looking at it. History tends to repeat itself, and then there's the other thing. History tends to rhyme with itself.
hmm And see, the thing is, imagine you're a German who's going through denazification, right? The NATO powers are telling you destroy all your Nazi equipment, your uh destroy all the bad German people stuff, and then you're tearing down monuments to the big bad mustache man, as well as you're tearing down concentration camps and whatnot, and then eventually you get to Auschwitz. And imagine that you're the guy that realizes, wait a minute, if all this disappears and no one remembers this, are we going to repeat it again? So imagine you're that guy, and then you stand in front of that crowd and say, let's not tear this down. I'm sorry, huh? It's because you have to remember that's why memorials exist. That's why monuments exist, is to remind the people, remind everybody it's a physical remnant of what was, and is to tell people and give people a lesson. And like Auschwitz exists to this day, a place of such suffering and death that would really benefit from just being torched to the ground for some good vengeance. Still stands to this day, but not out of Mustache Man pride, but it's more out of this is what we shouldn't do. This should be serve as a
Mhm.
reminder of what we should not do.
Except for this battlefield, which doesn't exist anymore. It's actually a town. The hill does not exist.
Yep, not anymore. Yeah.
But the palace on the northern end of the Bohemian line that still exists. It's in like a nice park area. If you are, it looks lovely.
If you
I
have the money, if you, or I'm not telling you how to spend your money, but if you really want to go visit, I would give it a good recommendation.
Yeah, or if you're in the Czech Republic, go.
Yep.
Or you're near
Um,
there, go. Go visit it. It's cool looking. It's a white
and so,
building.
before we close out, I want to get y'all's opinions on this. Which side do you think? I have a great idea of who would support who, but which side do you think you would have fought on? The Bohemian or um the Holy Roman Empires?
Um, Me personally, um, given that oh, that's weird because that's sort of like a religious the
Or
major reason you decide over them is like a religious thing.
Yeah, pretty
I
much.
guess out of a matter of policy and what they did, because I do know that there were some things that Frederick V did. There I did read something that Frederick V had done something that kind of made people not very happy with him, even though he was really only in power for roughly a year. People didn't really like him. And Frederick V really hadn't done anything wrong. He was trying to fix Rudolph II's problem, and that Matthias kind of passed on to him. It was Matthias, right? I gotta check that.
While he's doing that, Sideburns, you want to tell
Yeah,
us?
Matthias. So
Yeah, I would be the dirt poor farmer that got his house ransacked on the way to Prague.
uh,
I'd be I would probably be the on the Bohemian side. Let's see, dead corpse number 87 over there.
that's my favorite, hero in this character. Dead corpse number 87, Frederick.
Main character is dead corpse number 9.
Honestly, I think I would probably, on policy, I would side with the Holy Roman Empire. But I also want to serve under Schlick because that man is mental. Hey guys,
Yeah,
I'm gonna back out of the army, join the opponent's army, and then rejoin after like 2 years. Cool, dude.
And what's it? I would probably join the Protestants because I just can't. This sounds around this time. They tend to think very highly of themselves.
Except if you're Rudolph II, who's basically mentally ill.
Basically, he was mentally and physically ill. He was a Habsburg, for crying out loud.
Well, I mean, there wasn't that much wrong with him physically. It was more just his mind, and that he was kind of he was a. I've heard it. I keep saying I've heard it, but I've read it that the guy was basically a nerd that sat in his room that they couldn't get to come out for like policy meetings and events, and he was into all of this weird stuff. Like, dude, we just got to do this.
Wait, was he autistic?
I don't know what this guy was, but he was not king. He was not home.
And I don't mean this as a slur, but all in all, he was retarded.
Yeah.
Like academically and mentally, he was just.
No, academically, he seems to be an intelligent dude.
I
But he
meant
can't apply the intelligence to anything.
Yeah, I meant not academic. I didn't mean to say academically. I just meant to say mentally. He's just retarded. Like,
He's not home. There's
he's
nothing
not.
up there.
He's a very, again, he's a Habsburg. So
I think that just about wraps up White
all
Mountain.
right. All right. So that wraps up White Mountain. Unless anyone has anything else to say on this.
Can't wait to see all of the audience back in. We're aiming for under a month for the next thing. Hope y'all enjoy.